Sit tight because we've got a captivating tale lined up for you. Ready? Let's get right into it. The mist hung thick over the highway, transforming the world into a murky haze. Nathanial Hunter squinted through the windshield of the rescue vehicle, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The call had come in moments ago, multi-car pileup, unknown number of victims. Jesus, his partner, Rafael Mendez, muttered as they rounded a bend. The scene unfolded before them like a nightmare tableau, twisted metal, shattered glass, the acrid stench of burning rubber. Nathaniel's training kicked in immediately. Call for backup, he barked at Rafael as he jumped out of the vehicle. We're going to need every available unit. Nathaniel moved swiftly, assessing the situation. A silver sedan caught his eye, or what was left of it. The front end was completely crushed, steam hissing from the crumpled hood. As he approached, he heard it, a woman's scream, high and desperate. Help! Please, someone help me! Nathaniel's heart rate spiked as he peered through the shattered driver's side window. The woman inside was heavily pregnant, her distended belly pressed against the steering wheel. Blood matted her dark hair, and her eyes were wide with panic. Ma'am, I'm a medic, Nathaniel called, already reaching for his tools. Can you tell me your name? Emily, she gasped. Please, my baby. I think something's wrong. Nathaniel's mind raced. The woman was pinned and, from the looks of it, in active labor. He'd never performed a field delivery in conditions like this, let alone a C-section. But as he watched Emily's face contort with another contraction, he knew he had no choice. Emily, listen to me, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay calm. Can you do that for me? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Nathaniel worked quickly, cutting through the mangled door with practiced efficiency. As he eased Emily onto the stretcher, he felt a warm gush of fluid. Her water had broken. Rafael, he yelled. I need you over here, now. His partner appeared at his side, face grim as he took in the situation. We can't move her, Nathaniel said, his voice low. The baby's coming now, and I think there might be complications. We're going to have to do this here. Rafael's eyes widened, but he nodded, already reaching for the necessary equipment. The next few minutes were a blur of focused intensity. Nathaniel's hands moved with practiced precision as he prepared for the emergency C-section. Emily's screams had faded to low moans, her eyes glassy with shock. Stay with me, Emily, Nathaniel murmured as he made the first incision. You're doing great. Time seemed to stretch and compress. Nathaniel was vaguely aware of the chaos around him, the wail of approaching sirens, the shouts of other first responders, but his world had narrowed to this, the woman on the stretcher, the life growing inside her, and his own steady hands. And then, suddenly, a cry pierced the air. Nathaniel lifted the tiny, squirming infant, a wave of relief washing over him. It's a girl, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She's perfect, Emily. As he placed the baby on Emily's chest, Nathaniel became aware of the crowd that had gathered, his fellow medics, police officers, even some of the less injured victims of the pileup. They were all watching, faces a mix of awe and relief. In that moment, as he watched mother and child take their first breaths together, Nathaniel felt a profound sense of purpose. This was why he did this job. This was what it meant to make a difference. The house was quiet when Nathaniel got home, the events of the day still thrumming through his veins. He'd been celebrated as a hero at the hospital, but all he wanted was a hot shower and his own bed. Hannah. He called out, dropping his keys on the side table. No answer. Nathaniel frowned, moving through the house. It wasn't unusual for his wife to be out, but something felt off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. In the kitchen, he noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. He hit play, half listening as he opened the fridge. Mr. Hunter, this is Linda from Citizens Bank. I'm calling about the recent large withdrawals from your joint account. We just wanted to verify. Nathaniel froze, the carton of orange juice halfway to his lips. Large withdrawals. He hadn't made any large withdrawals. He set the juice down, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Now that he thought about it, there had been other signs. Hannah's increasingly secretive behavior, her vague explanations about where she'd been. Nathaniel booted up their shared computer, a sick feeling of dread growing as he accessed their online banking. The transactions stood out like neon signs, thousands of dollars withdrawn over the past few months. And there, buried in the credit card statements, charges at high-end hotels he'd never heard of. His hands shook as he closed the browser. This couldn't be happening, not to them, not to him. But even as denial rose up, a part of Nathaniel knew. He'd seen it before, in the broken families he encountered on the job. The signs were all there. With a heavy heart, Nathaniel made a decision. He'd install security cameras in the house, just to be sure, just to have proof one way or the other. As he worked, carefully hiding the tiny cameras, Nathaniel felt a part of himself hardening. Whatever happened next, he'd face it head-on. He was Nathaniel Hunter, after all. He saved lives for a living. He could save his own damn marriage. The annual Hunter family reunion was in full swing, the backyard alight with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue. Nathaniel moved through the crowd, plastering on a smile as he greeted relatives. Hannah was across the yard, deep in conversation with his sister, Diane. Nathaniel watched his wife, searching for any sign of guilt or unease. But Hannah laughed at something Diane said, looking for all the world like the perfect hostess. Uncle Nathaniel. His nephew, Tommy, came barreling towards him, a water gun in hand. Come play with us. Nathaniel was about to agree when a commotion at the gate caught his attention. His blood ran cold as he recognized the man stumbling into the yard, Elliot Whitman, the smooth-talking pharmaceutical rep who'd been hanging around Hannah's office lately. And from the look of him, he was drunk off his ass. Where is she? Elliot slurred, pushing past a startled Aunt Betsy. Where's Hannah? Nathaniel moved quickly, intercepting Elliot before he could get further into the yard. Elliot, he said, keeping his voice low and steady, you need to leave now. But Elliot wasn't having it. He shoved Nathaniel hard enough to make him stumble. You're a fool, Hunter, he spat. Hannah's been mine for years. Ever wonder why your kids look nothing like you? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Nathaniel felt a roaring in his ears, barely aware of the shocked gasps from his family members. But even as rage and pain threatened to overwhelm him, a part of his mind remained clear. Slowly, carefully, Nathaniel reached into his pocket and pressed the button on the small recording device he'd taken to carrying. Then he met Elliot's bloodshot eyes. Thanks for the public confession of paternity fraud, Elliot, he said, his voice eerily calm. Elliot's face contorted with fury. He lunged at Nathaniel, fists swinging wildly, but Nathaniel was ready. He sidestepped neatly, watching with satisfaction as Elliot stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward. There was a sickening crack as Elliot's face met the edge of the picnic table. He went down hard, blood streaming from his mouth. In the stunned silence that followed, Nathaniel turned to face his family. Hannah stood frozen, her face a mask of horror and guilt. Party's over, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying across the yard. I think it's time for everyone to go home. As his relatives filed out, murmuring in shocked disbelief, Nathaniel felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The worst had happened, yes, but he'd faced it, and he'd survived. Now it was time to fight. William Preston's office was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, the kind of place that whispered of old money and discreet solutions. Nathaniel sat across from his old friend, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. You're sure about this? William asked, his fingers steepled under his chin. Once we file, there's no going back. Nathaniel nodded, his jaw set. I'm sure. You've seen the evidence. William sighed, reaching for a thick manila folder. I have, and it's damning, Nathaniel. The bank statements, the hotel receipts, the security footage, it's more than enough to prove infidelity and the paternity fraud. Nathaniel's voice was barely above a whisper. That's trickier. William admitted, Elliot's drunken confession at the reunion helps, but we'll need DNA tests to prove it conclusively. Are you prepared for that? To potentially learn that the children you've raised are not mine. Nathaniel finished. I have to know, William. For their sake as much as mine. William nodded, his expression grim. All right. I'll file the papers today. We're going for full custody, citing Hannah's negligence and deceit. But, Nathaniel, you need to be prepared, this is going to get ugly. As if on cue, William's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his frown deepening. It's already started. The Chronicle's running a story on the hero firefighter's shocking divorce. Your private life is about to become very public. Nathaniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. But when he opened them again, there was steel in his gaze. Let them come. I've got nothing to hide. As Nathaniel left William's office, he felt a strange mix of dread and relief. The truth was out now, for better or worse. He thought of his children. Were they his children, waiting at home, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break over their lives? He'd shielded them as best he could, but he knew that innocence, once lost, could never truly be regained. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, DNA tests, and avoiding reporters camped outside his house. Nathaniel threw himself into his work, finding solace in the familiar routines of saving lives. But even there, he couldn't escape the whispers, the sidelong glances from colleagues who'd read the salacious headlines. It was Raphael who finally cornered him in the locker room after a particularly grueling shift. You can't keep this bottled up forever, man, Raphael said, his usual jovial tone replaced with concern. Talk to me. What's really going on? Nathaniel stared at his locker, the words stuck in his throat. But Raphael waited patiently, and finally, the dam broke. Nathaniel told him everything, the affair, the paternity doubts, the custody battle looming on the horizon. When he finished, Raphael let out a low whistle. Jesus, Nate. I had no idea it was that bad. But listen, you're not alone in this, okay? Whatever you need, I've got your back. Nathaniel nodded, grateful for the support. As he left the station that night, he felt a little lighter. He couldn't control the media circus or the outcome of the legal battle, but he wasn't facing it alone. That, at least, was something. The first cases trickled in slowly, barely a blip on the radar of New York's bustling emergency room, a few cases of severe flu, nothing too out of the ordinary for the tail end of winter. But then the trickle became a stream, and before anyone fully realized what was happening, it had turned into a flood. Nathaniel stumbled out of the ambulance, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. This was his fourth straight shift, and the city showed no signs of slowing down. As he wheeled another gasping patient into the overcrowded ER, he caught sight of Dr. Beatrice Monroe, the hospital's chief of emergency medicine. Dr. Monroe was a force of nature, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She barked orders with the precision of a military commander, somehow managing to bring order to the chaos of the overwhelmed hospital. Hunter, she called out as Nathaniel passed. I need you for a moment. Nathaniel followed her into a quiet corner, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of her intensity. I've been watching you, Dr. Monroe said without preamble. You've been working non-stop since this outbreak began. Your dedication is impressive. Nathaniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just doing my job, ma'am. Dr. Monroe's eyes narrowed. No, it's more than that. I've read about your personal situation. She held up a hand as Nathaniel opened his mouth to protest. I'm not here to gossip. I'm here to offer my support. She pulled out a business card, pressing it into Nathaniel's hand. I understand you're in the middle of a custody battle. If you need a character witness, someone to speak to your work ethic and dedication, I'd be happy to testify. Nathaniel stared at the card, a lump forming in his throat. Dr. Monroe, thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll get some rest, she replied, her tone softening slightly. You're no good to anyone if you work yourself to death. Now go home, Hunter. That's an order. As Nathaniel left the hospital, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. The custody hearings were looming, but now he had an unexpected ally in his corner. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. But even as he thought it, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Hannah and Elliot weren't done fighting dirty. He'd have to stay on his toes, ready for whatever they might throw at him next. Johnny Carter was not a man burdened by an excess of journalistic integrity. He preferred to think of himself as pragmatic, a survivor in the cutthroat world of modern media. So when Elliot Whitman approached him with a juicy story in a fat envelope of cash, Johnny didn't hesitate. We want you to write a series of articles, Elliot said, his smile oily in the dim light of the bar. Questioning Nathaniel Hunter's competence as a firefighter. Johnny raised an eyebrow. Hunter? The guy who delivered that baby on the highway? That's going to be a tough sell, buddy. Elliot's smile didn't waver. That's why we're paying you the big bucks, Johnny. Get creative. Dig up some dirt. There's got to be something in his past we can use. As Elliot laid out the details of their plan, Johnny felt a twinge of something, not quite guilt, he'd smothered that particular emotion years ago, but maybe a flicker of unease. Still, money was money, and times were tough. He'd do the job. The first article hit like a bombshell. Hero firefighter, savior or menace, the headline screamed. Johnny had done his homework, dredging up every minor complaint, every moment of hesitation in Nathaniel's career, and spinning it into a narrative of incompetence and recklessness. Nathaniel stared at the newspaper, his hands shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and half-truths, painting him as a danger to the very people he'd sworn to protect. This is bullshit. Raphael snarled, snatching the paper away. Everyone knows you're the best damn firefighter in the city. But the damage was done. As the days went by and more articles appeared, Nathaniel could feel the tide of public opinion turning against him. Whispers followed him everywhere he went. Parents pulled their children closer when he passed on the street. Even some of his colleagues began to eye him warily, as if wondering if there might be some truth to the accusations. The stress was taking its toll. Nathaniel found himself snapping at the slightest provocation, dark circles growing under his eyes as sleep became increasingly elusive. It was Raphael who finally intervened, dragging Nathaniel to a rundown community center on the edge of town. What are we doing here? Nathaniel asked, eyeing the graffiti-covered walls skeptically. Raphael grinned. You need an outlet, man. Something to take your mind off all this crap. They run a youth mentoring program here. I figured, who better to inspire some troubled kids than New York's finest firefighter? Nathaniel opened his mouth to protest, but Raphael was already pushing him through the door. Inside, a group of teenagers lounged on mismatched furniture, eyeing the newcomers with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Listen up, you little delinquents, Raphael announced cheerfully. This here is Nathaniel Hunter. He's going to be volunteering with us for a while. Try not to scare him off, all right? As the teens gathered around, their initial wariness giving way to genuine interest, Nathaniel felt something shift inside him. Here, in this dingy community center, he wasn't the subject of scandalous headlines or vicious rumors. He was just a guy with some stories to tell and some wisdom to share. For the first time in weeks, Nathaniel felt the knot in his chest begin to loosen. He couldn't control what the papers said about him, or how the custody battle would play out, but here, in this moment, he could make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see him through the storm. As the weeks went by, Nathaniel fell into a new routine: work, custody hearings, and evenings at the youth center. The articles continued, each more outrageous than the last, but Nathaniel found himself caring less and less. He had bigger battles to fight. It was at the youth center that he met Rosalie, a social worker with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She didn't seem to care about the headlines or the rumors. She just saw a man trying his best to make a difference. "You're good with them," Rosalie said one evening, watching as Nathaniel demonstrated basic first aid to a group of enthralled teenagers. "They respond to you." Nathaniel shrugged, but he couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. "They're good kids. Just need someone to believe in them." Rosalie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes that's all any of us need." As they stood there, watching the teens practice CPR on battered mannequins, Nathaniel felt the spark of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he'd face them head-on. He was Nathaniel Hunter, after all. Saving lives was what he did best. Diane Hunter had always been the family wild child. While Nathaniel followed the straight and narrow path, she'd zigzagged through life, leaving a trail of broken hearts and unpaid bar tabs in her wake. But beneath the carefree exterior beat the heart of a lioness when it came to her big brother. The Blue Moon Bar on the outskirts of New York was Diane's natural habitat. She nursed a whiskey, sharp eyes scanning the crowd. When Hannah and Elliot walked in, Diane nearly choked on her drink. What the hell were they doing here? She slouched lower in her booth, pulling the brim of her hat down. The estranged couple didn't notice her as they slid into a nearby booth, heads bent close in conspiratorial whispers. Diane's curiosity got the better of her. She casually moved to the jukebox, pretending to flip through song selections while straining to catch snippets of their conversation. "Running out of options," Hannah hissed. "The custody hearing is in 2 weeks, and that idiot Dr. Monroe is going to testify for Nathaniel." Elliot knocked back a shot, his handsome face twisted with frustration. "We need something big, something that'll destroy his credibility once and for all." Hannah's next words sent a chill down Diane's spine. "What about the substances at the hospital? If we could make it look like Nathaniel's been stealing." Elliot's eyes lit up with malicious glee. "Plant some stolen pharmaceuticals in his firehouse kit. A conviction like that would ruin him professionally and in the custody case." "Exactly," Hannah purred. "I still have access to the house. I could easily slip something into his kit before his next shift." Diane's hand froze on the jukebox. This was bad. Really bad. She needed to warn Nathaniel. As she slipped out of the bar, Diane's mind raced. She'd made more than her fair share of mistakes in life, but she'd never stooped to the level of framing someone for a crime. The fact that Hannah could do this to Nathaniel, the father of her children, made Diane's blood boil. She fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it in her haste to call Nathaniel. When his voicemail picked up, she swore under her breath. "Nathaniel, it's D. Call me back ASAP. It's about Hannah and Elliot, they're planning something, and it's not good." Diane paced outside the bar, chain-smoking as she waited for Nathaniel to call back. When her phone finally buzzed, she nearly jumped out of her skin. "D, what's going on?" Nathaniel's voice was tense. "We've got a problem, big bro," Diane said, her voice low. "I just overheard Hannah and Elliot plotting to frame you for substance theft at the hospital. They're going to plant stolen meds in your kit." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Nathaniel's voice, cold and determined, "Tell me everything." William Lang's office had become a war room. Nathaniel sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by Diane and William. Dr. Beatrice Monroe paced by the window, her normally impassive face clouded with concern. "This is a serious accusation," Dr. Monroe said, her voice clipped. "If they succeed in planting those substances, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for Nathaniel's career, but for the entire fire department." Nathaniel nodded. "Which is why we need to catch them in the act. We can't just accuse them without proof. They'll deny everything, and it'll look like I'm trying to smear them out of spite." William leaned forward, his lawyer's mind already formulating a plan. "We need to set up a sting operation. Let them think their plan is working, then catch them red-handed." "It's risky," Diane argued. "What if something goes wrong? Nathaniel could lose everything." "I don't have much left to lose," Nathaniel said quietly. He thought of his children, of the life he'd built. "But I have everything to gain. I'm tired of being on the defensive. It's time we took the fight to them." Dr. Monroe nodded approvingly. "I'll coordinate with the department's security team. We'll set up hidden cameras in the locker room. Nathaniel, you'll need to act completely normal, give them no reason to suspect you're on to them." As they hammered out the details of their counterplan, Nathaniel felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. For months, he'd been reacting, always one step behind Hannah and Elliot's scheming. Now, finally, he had a chance to take control. The next few days were a masterclass in deception. Nathaniel went about his duties at the station with his usual dedication, all while knowing that Hannah and Elliot were plotting his downfall. He felt their eyes on him, watching for any sign of weakness or suspicion. On the night of the planned frame-up, Nathaniel's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. He clocked in for his shift as usual, exchanging small talk with his colleagues. As he approached his locker, he could almost feel the trap about to spring. "Hunter." Dr. Monroe's voice rang out across the locker room. "I need you in my office. Now." Nathaniel turned, catching a glimpse of Hannah lurking near the row of lockers. Her face was a mask of frustrated anger. He suppressed a smile as he followed Dr. Monroe out. In her office, Dr. Monroe spoke loudly for the benefit of the hidden microphones. "I'm putting you on administrative leave, effective immediately. There have been concerns raised about your conduct." Nathaniel played his part, protesting his innocence with just the right amount of confusion and indignation. As he stormed out of her office, he saw Hannah slip into the locker room. The trap was set. Hours later, Nathaniel sat in a dimly lit security office, watching the footage unfold on multiple screens. There was Hannah, furtively approaching his locker. Elliot appeared moments later, keeping watch as she worked the lock. Nathaniel's fists clenched as he watched his estranged wife plant the stolen substances in his kit. It was one thing to know what she was planning, another entirely to see it happening. Just as Hannah closed the locker, the lights in the room blazed to life. Police officers swarmed in, led by Dr. Monroe herself. "Hannah Whitman, Elliot Whitman, you're under arrest for attempted evidence tampering and conspiracy to commit fraud," the lead officer announced. The look of shock and betrayal on Hannah's face as she was led away in handcuffs was almost satisfying. Almost. As the adrenaline of the sting operation wore off, Nathaniel felt a deep weariness settle into his bones. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was the final nail in the coffin of his marriage, the death of the family he thought he had. But as he watched the police car carrying Hannah and Elliot drive away, he also felt something else. Hope. For the first time in months, the future didn't look quite so bleak. The courtroom was packed, a sea of faces all turned toward the elevated bench where Judge Rebecca Lancaster presided. Nathaniel sat at the plaintiff's table, William at his side. Across the aisle, Hannah and Elliot looked pale and defeated, their lawyer whispering urgently in their ears. Judge Lancaster's gavel cracked like a gunshot, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. In the matter of Hunter versus Whitman, this court is now in session. What followed was a brutal dissection of Hannah and Elliot's actions. William presented a mountain of evidence, financial records showing Hannah's embezzlement from the joint accounts, DNA tests proving Elliot's paternity of the children, and, most damning of all, the video footage of their attempted frame-up. Dr. Monroe took the stand, her testimony a scathing indictment of the couple's character. "In all my years of medicine, I have never encountered such a blatant disregard for ethics and human decency," she declared, her eyes flashing with righteous anger. As the proceedings wore on, Nathaniel found his gaze drawn to Hannah, the woman he'd loved, the mother of his children. How had it come to this? He searched her face for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the person he'd once known, but all he saw was a mask of cold defiance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Lancaster cleared her throat. The courtroom fell silent, every ear straining to catch her words. "The actions of the defendants, Hannah and Elliot Whitman, are nothing short of reprehensible," she began, her voice ringing with authority. "They have engaged in a systematic campaign of fraud, defamation, and attempted evidence tampering. Their disregard for the law and for basic human decency is shocking." She turned her steely gaze on Hannah and Elliot. "You face multiple criminal charges, including fraud, defamation, and attempted evidence tampering. This court recommends the maximum sentences allowed by law." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Nathaniel sat very still, hardly daring to breathe. Furthermore, Judge Lancaster continued, "In the matter of child custody, this court grants full custody to Nathanial Hunter, along with a substantial financial settlement to be paid by the defendants." The gavel fell with a final, decisive crack. It was over. As the bailiffs moved to lead Hannah and Elliot away, Nathaniel stood. He needed to say something, to find some closure in this moment. "Hannah, Elliot," his voice carried in the sudden hush of the courtroom. They turned to face him, Hannah's eyes brimming with unshed tears, Elliot's face a mask of sullen defeat. "You tried to destroy everything I love," Nathaniel said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "I'll never forgive your betrayal, but I refuse to let it define me. I'll use this experience to be a better father and a better firefighter." As they were led away, Nathaniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the first step on the road to healing. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of reporters waited, hungry for a statement. Nathaniel brushed past them, ignoring their shouted questions. He had more important things to focus on now. His children were waiting, and he had a lot of lost time to make up for. Months passed, the seasons turning as Boston slowly recovered from the flu outbreak that had brought the city to its knees. On a crisp autumn morning, Nathaniel stood before a crowd gathered in Liberty Park. His firefighter uniform was crisp and freshly pressed, his shoulders squared as he stared out at the sea of faces. Mayor Anthony Fitzgerald approached the podium, his face solemn. "Today, we honor those who went above and beyond during our city's darkest hours," he began. "Firefighters, paramedics, nurses, doctors, all the unsung heroes who risked their lives to save others. But one man stands out for his exceptional bravery and dedication." He turned to Nathaniel, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "Nathaniel Hunter, please step forward to receive this commendation for your tireless work during the influenza outbreak." As Nathaniel accepted the award, his eyes scanned the crowd. There was Marcus, grinning from ear to ear and giving him a thumbs up. Dr. Monroe stood nearby, her usual stern expression softened with pride. William nodded approvingly, a rare smile on his face. And there, in the front row, were the faces that mattered most, his children, their eyes shining with a mix of pride and love that made Nathaniel's heart swell. Beside them stood Claire, the social worker he'd met at the youth center. She caught his eye and winked, her smile warm and encouraging. As the applause died down, Nathaniel stepped up to the microphone. He looked out over the sea of faces, feeling the weight of all he'd been through, all he'd overcome. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady. "This award is an honor, but the real heroes are the people of Boston, the patients who fought so hard to survive, the families who supported them, my fellow first responders who never gave up, no matter how dire things got. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The past year has been challenging, to say the least. There were times when I thought I'd lost everything, my marriage, my children, my career. It all seemed to be slipping away. Nathaniel's gaze fell on his children, their faces a mirror of his own determination. But I learned something important: our strength isn't measured by the challenges we face, but by how we face them. Every setback, every betrayal, every moment of doubt, they're all opportunities to become better, stronger versions of ourselves. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. I stand here today not as a hero, but as a man who's been given a second chance. A chance to be a better father, a better firefighter, a better person. And I promise you this, I won't waste it. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Nathaniel stepped back from the podium. He made his way to his family, scooping up his youngest in a bear hug as the others crowded around. Claire squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride in something more, a promise of a future filled with love and trust. Nathaniel Hunter had walked through fire and come out the other side. He'd lost much, but gained so much more. As he stood there, surrounded by the people he loved, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, not alone, but with the strength of family, friends, and a community that had seen him at his lowest and lifted him up. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations with his children, long nights of self-doubt, and the constant challenge of rebuilding trust. But for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt truly, deeply hopeful. He had weathered the storm and emerged stronger for it. As the ceremony wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Nathaniel looked out over the Boston skyline. This city had seen him broken, but it had also seen him rise. Whatever the future held, he was ready for it, one life at a time, one day at a time. Nathaniel Hunter would continue to do what he did best, save lives and make a difference. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Nathaniel felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Claire standing beside him, her smile soft and genuine. "You did good, Nathaniel," she said quietly. Nathaniel nodded, glancing back at his children, who were playfully arguing over who got to hold the award first. "I had a lot of help." Claire's gaze followed his. "They're proud of you, you know. And not just because of what you did today. They're proud because you didn't give up on them, or on yourself." Nathaniel swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I'm still working on it." "We all are," Claire murmured. Then she slipped her hand into his. "So, what's next?" Nathaniel looked down at their joined hands, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He'd lost so much, but in the process, he'd found something even more valuable: strength, resilience, and the possibility of new beginnings. "I think," he said slowly, a smile tugging at his lips, "we take it one step at a time." Claire nodded, her fingers tightening around his. "Sounds like a good plan." They stood there together, watching as the city lights flickered on, casting a soft glow over Liberty Park. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt ready to embrace it. With Claire by his side, his children cheering him on, and a renewed sense of purpose, Nathaniel Hunter was no longer the man who had been broken by betrayal. He was a man who had been reforged by it, stronger and more determined than ever. As they turned to leave, Claire gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "Let's go home, Nathaniel." "Yeah," Nathaniel said softly, his gaze lingering on the city skyline one last time before he turned away. "Let's go home."